Recording in progress.
Hey, one and all, this is an irregularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee because we were asked to relinquish our regular meeting time on Monday in order for the City Council to meet with the school committee, which we were glad to do, but that meant that we had to move to another night, which is tonight. And I just want to acknowledge and express appreciation to all those who were able to attend so that we can do our work. Let me go around and introduce some members of the committee who are here. I'm Lyle Baker, the chair. The vice chair is to my right, Councilor Oliver from Ward 1, Councilor Danberg from Ward 6, Councilor Wright from Ward 3, Councilor Getz from Ward 5, and are we joined by anybody from the committee online?
Josh.
Councilor Krinsman from Ward 4 has joined us along with Councilor Maliki from Ward 3. Any members of the planning board who are here?
And I see Peter
Oh,
Dorger.
Peter,
Yeah, at the bottom.
okay. All right. And Mr. Dorringer is here from the planning board, and we're also joined by Ms. Carr from the planning staff, and if we got others who are...
Dane.
Amy Dane.
Oh, Amy Dane from the Planning and Development Board. Great.
Councilor Farrell.
Councilor Farrell has joined us, who's welcome to sit in. I know, Councilor Farrell, that Councilor Kalis is not here, so you can sit in the Ward 8 seat if you want, so you're closer to the sound.
Thank you.
Okay, so, or it would be helpful to have the actual agreement in front of us as opposed to other material like that. Aha, super, thank you. We have a very able committee clerk. So this meeting is both audio and video recorded, and just so that everybody knows that. We have a number of items scheduled for conversation tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the work plan for the new term, and that's just to alert people on where we're going. We're going to be, next time, you may recall, very soon, on Monday, we will be taking up the public hearing on the electrification ordinance. So I hope all of you will be able to attend that. And we're also going to be trying to capture some ideas about what is coming on the whole question of building electrification, but that will be later, as well as continue some of the items we're dealing with tonight. But if there are members of the committee or others on the call who know of items that are coming our way, I just want you to make sure that we know about them so that we can put them in the planning process for each of the meetings that are coming up. And I will try and, after we have our next planning meeting, get out to the committee at least a little bit of a calendar of what we expect to take up when, so you'll know a little bit in advance of what is likely to come our way, although there are obviously changes. Ms. Kyra, do you want to say anything more at this point about that, just our calendaring process?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right, so let's go to the first item, which is an update on the process of getting the VCOD, which we passed in December, approved by the state. Just to clarify for everyone, as I understand it, Ms. Cairo, why don't you come up to the table, Ms. Cairo, and you'll be heard more easily.
Chair Baker,
Yes.
we need to hold the discussion regarding our work.
That's correct. Councilor Krinsman, there's an opportunity to move hold on item 2124.
I move hold.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you.
I would just like to point out that on behalf of Councilor Krinsman, I was holding my tongue on the hold so that I could, anyway.
Duly noted, and thank you, Councilor Oliver. Well played.
Anyway, thank you, Ms. Norton. So this is, let me read this item into the record. This is 4324 quarterly update on projects using the VC overlay districts. This is Councilor Albright and Danberg requesting updates on any potential projects brought to the planning department under the new village center overlay district. The update should include indications of interest in actual permits filed for which villages and under which zoning districts, numbers of stories and units. Let me just indicate that this, as I indicated in the chair's note that's in the agenda, we're going to get a brief update from the planning department on the status of this whole thing, not just the applications, because we want to understand where it stands with the state. So, and then members of the committee and others can ask questions of Ms. Kyra, who is here representing the planning department. Ms. Kyra.
Great, thank you. I'll start briefly with the application side of things, because that's probably a little shorter. And then we can talk about the status of our submittal to the state. So the zoning, is in effect, and we are in the process of working closely with other departments to understand and adapt our permitting, our workflows. We're working on new records in NewGov. We've been working closely with inspectional services on what needs to be added to their building permit to sort of memorialize that people are opting in, as well as some of the unique requirements that will need to be included as part of those applications under this. We have some public info sheets that are just about ready to go online that are meant to sort of help distill the information for the public, as well as for folks coming to the counter, inspectors giving out that information, architects, building owners, property owners. So that should be ready to go very soon. We are getting a number of inquiries. Nothing moving forward to an actual permit application at this time, but we are seeing inquiries sort of across the board in MRT for adaptive reuse, potentially some inquiries or questions about VC2, VC3, and some new restaurants or existing restaurants that are looking to expand that may be able to take advantage of the zoning as well and the parking requirements. So we'll continue to provide updates on that. We're right now working on building in the information we capture in the forms that will help us do regular reporting. So, and this is maybe something we'll touch on as part of the later item on the agenda. But any suggestions on things that I think would be worthwhile to track? We're tracking, right now we have number of units, number of affordable units at what affordability level, commercial area, whether it's adaptive reuse, those sorts of things. Number of parking spaces provided. So any ideas, feel free to send our way as we're building these applications now.
So why don't we pause for a minute on
Sure.
just to see if members, I want to also recognize Councilor Wright, who I think was out of the room when I introduced people. Do you want to ask a question and then Councilor
Yeah,
Denver?
two questions real quick. So, could you send us in an email what you're tracking so that we know? Because these sort of things I don't know what all these sort of things are.
Sure.
And then second, how is the new zoning being addressed in the assessor's database?
So assessor's database is updated.
Okay.
All the online maps are updated, the interactive zoning map, the GIS, assessor's database. And what we did in the assessor's database is, so the map's updated, the legend's updated if you turn on the zoning theme. And on the left side where it has the property information and it lists the zone, it shows both. So if you click on property, it'll show the underlying district /
Oh yeah,
Village
this says
Center.
BU1/VC2.
The other thing, sorry, I forgot.
Wait, and how would you indicate that they have to require first floor on the retail?
So you can, if you turn on the themes and the zoning, there's a green line along the mixed-use priority streets. That's somewhere that I think we may want to continue to tweak. We worked really closely with our GIS analyst, and he worked really closely with the company behind the assessor's database. It was a little tricky to get things in there. I think we may want to try a bit more on making that really obvious. I also would like to add a field on the left where it has the zoning that says you're on a mixed-use priority street, because that is an important piece of information. We're not currently set up to do that.
Yeah,
So
I
we
don't
need
see
to-
that on here at all.
So we need to work with MapGeo to see if we can add, and the assessors department to see if we could do that. In NewGov, we're still working on getting flags to come through, which are on the internal side. We see flags for all sorts of things. I'd like a flag for the mixed-use priority, the properties that front that mixed-use priority street, just to make that a little easier that, you know, staff and inspectors see it. So we're still working on that piece. We also, one other thing I forgot to mention, in addition to the info sheets, we are creating a short overview video that we should have online soon, and that actually walks you through how to look up either whether your property is in the overlay district or not, and what the zoning is, and sort of briefly goes through what it all means.
You may wanna, I don't know if you wanna change the colors. It's really hard looking at the map, you know, if it's VC2 and it's a BU, you know, cause you're looking at the angles and stuff.
I know, we tried a bunch of different things, and we may still need to go back to the drawing board on it. It's tough because we use all the colors already in our underlying zoning, so there wasn't, and we need to show both. So we played with different hatches, different spacing between the lines and the hatching, different line weights. But then it doesn't, when it went into the assessor's database, it didn't translate well. So our GIS analyst had to work closely with the folks at, I think it's Mount Geo, to try and improve it. But yeah, you're right, we may still need to make some changes.
Maybe white or yellow as for the slashes.
Yeah, the problem is it depends on the underlying zone. So if you're over an SR zone that's yellow,
Yeah.
you won't see it. So we've got to be able to cover everything from like a light yellow to a dark purple, and still see it. So
Or maybe a heavier black.
yeah, we may be able to increase the line weights. Hopefully people are also looking at the left panel to see, because that will for sure say what your zone is.
Thank you.
So, I have a question too, but I want to recognize other members of the committee first. Councilor Denver.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, thank you for all of this work, and I'm very glad to hear that we're tracking, adaptive reuse, parking, spaces, number of affordable units and number of units, et cetera. I'm not surprised that, we haven't had, any actual, active, users yet. It's still very early.
People are still understanding.
And I think people are still trying to understand. I'm glad to hear that the assessor's database is updated. And I would just ask that, you continue to tweak, make the tweaks that you're doing, and keep us informed, on, what is going on. And, someone else has, I think, moved to hold this, and
Well, no,
If
don't move to
not-
hold it yet. I mean, Councilor, Crispin is,
I'll move to hold at the time.
well, I think,
No.
I think.
Someone's gonna come out with a screen.
There's a moment in the sun here.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah, just as a quick follow-up, so right now, like, before someone takes or chooses, right, underlying or the overlay, we've got both in there, right? You've got BU2 and BC2, whatever. And then I assume that once they make their selection, once a property
goes away.
transacts, the other one just goes away.
Exactly.
Well, at least that way, the color coding will be easier.
It will be once they
there's one,
opt
not
in,
two.
because it'll be, I forget what we decided, if it's light gray, maybe a color that we're not, like, it's either white or light gray, I think, underneath of it. And the other zone will go away in the left panel. And that's our final sort of step in our building permit workflow, is that it automatically gets routed to our GIS analyst to update the maps once they've opted in. One more thing, sorry, I forgot to mention. We did also create an email address, vcod@newtonma.gov, for all inquiries. That goes to a number of members of the staff, and myself, Mr. Lamel, who have been working closely on this, as well as our whole current planning team that will be and is involved in the implementation. So that's a good resource for any general questions or inquiries.
And then you just said, sorry, if I
No,
may,
go ahead.
just,
Yeah.
you said something that triggered one other question that I was thinking about recently. When in the process, like, I buy a piece of property from Stephen, right? At closing, thank you for selling your property, by the way. I volunteered you for that. When does the declaration of underlying or overlay happen?
With
And
a,
how?
with a building permit. So when you're doing something.
Okay.
So if you own a property, you're not doing anything with the property, there's no need
Okay.
to do anything. You would choose whether or not to opt in when you're seeking a building permit to do some sort of work. And at that point, you're gonna decide which one makes more sense for what you're looking to do. And with the issuance of the building permit, that you are officially opted in and that underlying zoning would go away.
Or whatever they choose.
Or whatever, and
They
you know,
can
nothing.
choose to leave it BU too if they want to.
Then nothing changes,
Right.
and that's still an option, the overlay still exists as a future option. So you could get a permit, say you're BU two and VC two. You could, just carry on as BU two, you could do minor work to your property, you could get a permit, keep it as BU two. Nothing changes, the overlay district is still there, you're just not utilizing it. 10 years down the road, you may decide I wanna build something, and I'm gonna utilize VC two. At that point, I'm gonna opt in, and then the BU two goes away.
So at that point, you only have to opt into the overlay. You don't have to,
You have to
you don't
fully
have to
comply.
choose the underlying,
Right.
right, it's already there.
The
But
underlying,
VC
yeah,
two, for example, would always be possible.
yes, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So I'm gonna recognize Councilor Getz, and then I'll come back to Councilor Wright.
Okay, we talked a little bit in the, maybe 2 meetings ago about us as counselors coming in.
Excuse me, the machine out here is making noise that maybe prevents you from being picked up by
So
the.
I don't know, whether or not that's an opportunity or a possibility for us to sort of be educated in terms of how now the planning staff are working with ISD in terms of, the implementation. So that's what I'm curious about, is the, us
Yeah,
being, privy to that process.
sure. Well, I'm happy to, and maybe we can either offline or at a future meeting sort of go through what these sort of records and workflows look like if anyone wants to sort of look at the back end of things. We're happy to do that. The information we're about to put out may also help answer some questions about how the process will work. But no, we're always happy to discuss whether anyone wants to do that one-on-one or if there are more specifics you want to talk about in these meetings, we can do that.
Okay, let me just interject for anybody who's been on Mars for the last 2 years. We're talking about Village Center Overlay District. That's what VCOD means,
Okay.
just for the.
Yeah, and then the other piece of it is if an applicant comes in, normally the DRTs occur.
Yep.
So in those sessions, which we're not privy to, those kinds of discussions are going on.
Yeah, so we're recommending, right now, we haven't even gotten to that point. So we are still, recommending that people, and everyone just has questions. I think it's gonna take a lot of conversations. We have people come to the counter and call and email, and that's why we created the general email address, because I think a lot of times people don't know exactly who to go to. So we're recommending that everyone talk to us before moving too far along, and that given this is so new, that we sort of stay in relatively close contact, especially, questions come up that maybe we hadn't anticipated or considered. So we're still expecting, likely to go through the DRT process, especially for those that require site plan review or special permit, but even for by right projects, because I think it's a good opportunity to have city staff from different departments there to answer some questions. But we have, said that we're happy to report back to this committee on what we're seeing. We also, are excited once we finally see something to bring that forward and show what's being submitted and what it looks like. And, that may lead to, quite conversation about, is this doing exactly what we wanted? Are there things we need to tweak? I mean, already you'll probably see us coming forward in the next couple of months with some very recommended minor tweaks as our, staff who are implementing it, who are very involved in the creation of it, but there's things you just can't foresee until you're actually using it, you're getting real examples and real questions. There's little things we're finding like, oh, this doesn't quite make sense here, or but one thing that came up today is referencing that accessory buildings have to follow the accessory building rules, which we thought was understood and assumed, but those are in the residential section, not in the overlay district section, so we probably want to add a reference to that. So there's little things that will come up that I think will be an ongoing process of just a little bit cleanup. You know, we've done that with the garage ordinance, I think a couple of times already, so we expect that. But.
So, let me recognize people who haven't spoken. Did you want to ask a question? No, I'm sorry. Councilor Red?
So how many emails are you getting a week, do you think? 3, 10, 20?
I don't know, because they're.
We just established.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned the new email address, because they're going to different people, or they're showing up at the counter. It's hard to say.
I would say at this point in time, under 10.
Yeah,
And there's I would say there's follow-ups.
and some of them are just very general questions, or not even a specific property, or I'm looking
Yeah.
to do something. It's what is this? What does it mean?
So you mentioned that some restaurants are asking about the zoning, and it's something I actually didn't think about. So they can opt in and say BC2 and not provide any parking, but not actually build anything.
Right.
So they can do the zoning just to expand their restaurant or business.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The property owner would need to, right? So it can't be an individual tenant
Yeah.
opts in. It would be the property owner for the entire property, and then that property would, you know, ongoing need to be fully compliant and, you know, subject to just the rules of the BCOD. They can't go back or pick and choose. But yeah, and that was something we had talked about in the process, that the parking could make it easier for new businesses to move in. We are hearing that that may be a possibility. Again, no one's actually come forward with a specific proposal, but
And easier for existing businesses to stay.
yeah, like we have one that wants to add a few more seats that may otherwise trigger a special permit that may be able to opt into the zoning and do it on a site that, you know, doesn't have parking today. And
So I'm going to suggest we entertain, not because this is the general item, I don't want to hold it yet, there's a second piece I want to get to if we can. But if there is a, before the report comes out, because we won't have a report for the council meeting that's, because this is item going to be held, but when the final report comes out later in the week, that includes the discussion, because everything's going to the packet tomorrow for the council meeting on Tuesday. If there is a document that you have that you think is worth attaching to the report for information of the council, we can check with the clerk and we can see whether something might be.
yeah, the next packet's probably more realistic,
All right.
just because tomorrow would be a
Oh,
short
no,
term.
not tomorrow. I'm talking about the next time.
Oh, next time, okay, I
Yeah,
thought you
because
said
we're
tomorrow.
gonna have, the report for tomorrow is going to be
Okay.
basically, everything on the agenda
Yeah.
was discussed but held and wait, and
Yeah.
you'll get the document later, because the
Okay.
council doesn't have to act on anything.
No.
Tomorrow, so that's the, on Tuesday, but when the document that's more robust, that will have your comments in it, then comes out, if there's something
Got
to
it.
attach.
Yeah, we can work with the clerk on
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Tariq has a question.
Who had a question? I'm sorry.
Councilor Lucas.
Councilor Lucas, up in the upper left-hand corner of our grand screen. Welcome.
Greetings, everyone. I just want to follow up on something that Ms. Kyra said regarding that a restaurant or building could opt into the BCOD in order to waive parking requirements. Just want to share that I had a email conversation with Economic Development Director John Sisson about this very issue. A restaurant in Newtonville is trying to expand their indoor seating. And he mentioned two possibilities: a special permit, which he said could take in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 months in order to get in front of land use, which seems a bit too long if you ask me. And then the other option is the building owner opting into the VCOD, which would waive the parking requirement. So I I don't know if that's gonna happen. I don't know the property owner. I do know the restaurant owner, so just want to share that with the committee and with the planning department. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move to the second part of the question, which is what's happening with the state and our submission, and can you clarify what's happening with all the economic feasibility? So that's a matter of, I think, great interest to everybody.
Sure, and to back up a bit and for the benefit of those who, maybe weren't as involved in the process last year, the way the state requirements work is they're very complicated, very strict requirements from the state on what counts towards our, minimum unit capacity, what doesn't. One of the state requirements is that if we have affordability requirements for affordable housing, we can't set those above 10% of the units at no lower than 80% AMI. If you want to go beyond that to require more than 10% of the units and or a lower AMI, you need to do what they called an economic feasibility analysis in order to show that the zoning that you adopted can meet those affordability requirements and still pencils out. So because our inclusionary zoning ordinance is, I think, a bit more progressive than that, and we wanted to apply it, we need to do this economic feasibility analysis. That's the piece that's still underway. So at the end of the year, we had a December 31 deadline. We submitted the zoning that was adopted, and I think we provided this package to the council today of exactly the latest submittal. So we submitted the state's model, which is an Excel workbook, the GIS files that show just the parcels that meet all of the state requirements. They can be built by right. They're a contiguous area that's at least 5 acres. They're within a half-mile transit, et cetera. So we submitted the GIS, the workbook, and there's an online form we had to fill out. We also had a certified copy of the zoning ordinance, the maps, all of that we submitted to the state. They then came back to us a month ago, maybe?
In January.
Yeah, in January, as they were doing their completeness review, and there were some things we needed to add or tweak that don't change the zoning or anything, but it's just how we fit it into their submittal. We had to adjust some the way we map some things, and how the right-of-way is being captured in the GIS files for each zone and each parcel, et cetera, and tweak some things in the model. We then sent a revised package to the state. They just this week confirmed that we have a complete submittal, aside from the economic feasibility analysis, which I'll get to in a second, and they are undergoing their review. We expect this will probably take a couple months. This is the first time they're doing it. They have all the rapid transit communities, and then they have the 100 and something communities that have to come into compliance this year, and many of whom are towns looking to get on spring town meeting. So they are pretty swamped, the state, so they're saying it may be 60 days after we have a complete application. The one missing piece is the economic feasibility
Well,
analysis.
hang on a second, before you go there, Councilor Wright had a
I'll
question.
wait
Okay,
till she's
all
done.
right, I just want to make sure
Okay.
we cover questions about the topics as you go. Okay.
So the one missing piece is the economic feasibility analysis. MAPC is doing this for us. They did it for, I think, most, if not all of the rapid transit communities that were looking to use an inclusionary zoning ordinance that was different than what the state's limits were. They received funding from the state to do this analysis, and they've been working very closely with the state on exactly what's required and have a template to do this. They're doing that analysis for us. They had some technical issues at the end of the year that they really set them back, and our particular inclusionary zoning ordinance is more complicated than most of the other ones that they've done, so it's taken them longer to do ours and to adapt their model to fit our zoning and our inclusionary zoning ordinance. We should have that report in another week or two. We've been saying this for months, so.
I dare to say.
We just checked in with them again this week. They say they're finalizing everything, doing a last like quality control check, and we should have a report. They've been in close contact with the state, so they know this is coming. They know sort of the challenges MAPC has had. We are in, interim compliance. We have a letter from the state saying so. We're just waiting on this economic analysis from MAPC that will hopefully justify that the zoning we submitted all works per the state's requirements with our inclusionary zoning.
So there's just a point of clarification before we get to the question. The basic idea is that for the BCOD properties, that everything is subject to our inclusionary zoning ordinance, right?
That's how we wrote the BCOD, is that everything would be subject to.
Subject to
inclusionary
it.
zoning.
So
Yes, correct.
the question is being asked is, will it be possible to comply with our ordinance as a matter of economic feasibility if it's in the BCOD district, right? And so one
Correct.
parcel might comply and another parcel might not? Is that just so we understand the?
So they're not going parcel by parcel, they have to look at every, and Zach, feel free to jump in, every type. So they have to look at VC3 all residential, VC3 mixed use, VC2 all residential, VC2 mixed use. They don't have to look at MRT because you can't do more than 6 units by right, and our inclusionary zoning kicks in at 7 units. They also have to test.
You can do more than
Wait a
6 by
minute,
right.
just,
No, you can't.
hang on a second. Don't, let me just finish, let her
Okay.
finish.
You can do more than 6 by special permit.
No, adaptive reuse, you can put 15 on it.
No, it's,
Hang on,
Okay,
hang on,
okay.
hang on. Just a minute.
You
Let
can-
let me
you-
get the basics out.
Yeah.
okay, it is 6 max. But, and actually, we can't even count adaptive reuse. We can only look at new construction for these purposes. So actually, you can only do 4 in MRT per the state's model. And they need to look at kind of the smallest, like,
They need to look at the smallest project sizes where the inclusionary zoning ordinance kicks in.
Yeah.
Because that's the point. So they need to look at 7-unit projects in VC2 and VC3. And then they need to kind of use real life examples as well to look at different project size, to test them across different project sizes. 15-unit, 25-unit, 40-unit projects, and to determine the feasibility.
So-
and we're not so worried about the larger ones. The smaller ones is where the state's really focused. And the mixed use obviously being the trickiest one. And just to serve a bit of history, we weren't initially allowed to require mixed use per the state's guidelines. We thought it was still very important in certain areas. So, as a sort of collective group in the committee, decided it was still important to require mixed use. We just weren't counting those. So those units were above and beyond our obligation. There was a lot of successful lobbying, much of which I think came from Newton with the state to allow some level of mixed use requirements. They adjusted their guidelines so that you could have a certain portion of your zoning require mixed use. But you still have to meet those feasibility requirements if you also have the inclusionary zoning. We initially didn't have too much of the smaller mixed use, the VC2 and the smaller sites that we would still be submitting because we were only submitting things that were within a half mile of our commuter rail and green line stations. And we weren't including Auburndale because it didn't meet the minimum contiguous area requirements. So it was really the ones that we ended up with, aside from Auburndale, that we would be submitting. As the process went through, and amendments from the council, we ended up with more VC2 mixed use. That's the tricky part because they're having to test these small sites, and then when you are further reducing the number of floors, that can be residential because we do limit that footprint no matter what. You're now looking at 2.5 floors of residential. That's always been where the concern has been.
So the net effect though is I hear it, that if the economic feasibility analysis being done by
MAPC.
MAPC says that this particular zoning classification in this situation, using our inclusionary zoning ordinance, is not economically feasible, it doesn't count towards the state number, or what's the impact of that, is what I just wanna be clear.
Yeah, so the impact would be that it wouldn't count, so it wouldn't, the state wouldn't consider that compliant. The impact being either we ideally don't need those units, and we exceeded it, or we have to go back and make some amendments, which would either be to adjust the zoning to be feasible, or to change our inclusionary requirements to be what MAPC allows, sort of by right or as a base without this study. What we submitted, so when we did the final calculation, and all along we were doing estimates, it's a lot to rerun the model, we did a lot of back of the envelope calculations through the council process with various amendments. When we did the full rerun, had our consultant do everything, full GIS analysis, the model, all of that, we ended up with enough units that if you back out the VC2 mixed use, we still hit our target. So what we submitted was everything but that, so that the state could just move forward with that review. And MAPC is still doing the economic analysis of that VC2 mixed use to see if it's feasible. If it is, we can certainly add that to what the state's reviewing. That gives us an additional buffer if they find some other issues that they come back to. And if not, it just moves forward.
So right now, unless there's something they find that in the submission you made is not correct, even if all those units were deemed infeasible, as I hear it,
Yeah.
it wouldn't affect our compliance with the state.
That's correct. And again, there's still unknown. This was all new. The model isn't an exact fit for our zoning. We worked really closely with the state on this, and we think we're in good shape. But I can't say for certain that they won't come back with something that's.
No, but I mean,
But yes.
that would be referring to what was submitted without the mixed use
Correct.
piece. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, just want to be clear about that. Now, Councilor Wright.
So I have a couple questions. So
and
you
then Councilor
didn't submit the BC2 on priority streets to the state?
Correct, we didn't, well, we included the whole ordinance and the whole map. What we submitted as our official sort of GIS, these are the parcels. So we had to go through and take out the over 30,000 square foot parcels, the non-contiguous parcels, et cetera. We didn't include the VC2 mixed use there, and we did not include it in the workbook that we submitted. We did give everything to MAPC, and they are doing the analysis of it. And ideally it comes back and it does pencil out for the state's requirements, and we have more buffer than we hopefully need. But right now the state's not reviewing it.
So, but whose decision was not to submit to the state what we in the city council and ZAP thought was being submitted as part of the NBTA Communities Act?
So we didn't include it because when we ran the numbers, we were over. There were other things that we did not submit. Like I said, the over 30,000 non-contiguous were things that come out. So the GIS, the MBTA communities map looks different than the city map. It always did. And we had feedback. I mean, I think we relayed this during the council process. We had pretty strong feedback from MAPC that it wouldn't work out, but we asked them to do that analysis anyway.
Okay, so back in December, you said Landwise was gonna do the analysis. And so who made the decision and when to use an MAPC, which I don't think really has the experience like Landwise does in this?
They do actually. They have people that specialize in this, and they were doing pretty much all the other communities. And we're working closely with the state on it. We were working with Landwise. We had hoped Landwise would do this. Landwise ended up not having capacity. And so what we did was MAPC was already set up by the state to do this. and had funding to do it, was doing just about everyone else's, and had a good model and something that the state was kind of blessed. We had Landwise work closely with MAPC. Landwise had the same opinion on it because we talked to them as well. And so Landwise and MAPC sort of worked together, took the work Landwise had done for MAPC to build off of it and sort of share assumptions.
But Landwise, I wrote the memo in January, Landwise back 2 years ago said just 2 and 3 story buildings were, feasible, but you needed to have more density, which, they had FARs of 1.2 to 1.6, and we're looking at 3 to 4 plus. And you need to reduce the parking requirement, which we went to 0. So if these were feasible in lower stories, it's surprising why this is not gonna be feasible. And we're having, like, on Washington Street, a 3-story, apartment building being built, and if it wasn't feasible, they wouldn't be doing this.
It's the ground floor commercial. So what Landwise was testing did not include mandatory ground floor commercial in those lower scale buildings. We hope it comes out as feasible. I think we're in a really good position that even if it's not feasible, we shouldn't have to amend the zoning. And hopefully it is feasible. There's also, it meets the state's requirements per what they're requiring we do as part of this analysis versus it's feasible in real life. So we hope we'll still see things, and you may have long-term property owners that are doing, it's a very different calculation for them on what pencils out and what doesn't. So I think hopefully we do still see things in the VC2 mixed use. However, it may not meet the state's requirements to apply our inclusionary zoning. But like I said, we're in a good position because it won't require, hopefully, won't require any amendments to the zoning.
So then we wouldn't have to do it. So RZ, and then are they looking at for our IZ, I think it's under 10 or 11 units, they can make it cash.
Correct, from
Instead
7 to 9 units, they can do a cash
Yeah.
payment. Yes, they're looking at that.
Okay, and I did take a look right here really quick on the MRT, and you can have more than, you can have 15, 20 units on a lot if it's big enough. Cause
Wow.
it says multiple buildings on a
By
lot
site plan review.
are required in lieu of special permit. Yes, site plan review, so by right.
But that's with
yes.
adaptive reuse, and adaptive reuse doesn't count towards the state
I
requirements.
understand that, but you made a statement here
Sorry,
saying.
I meant per the state requirements,
Okay,
we
yeah.
don't need to look at,
Yes. But you could put more, 10, 15.
that's correct, but we don't
Fine.
need to, which is good, I think, we don't need to analyze the inclusionary zoning requirements for
Yeah.
MRT
Yeah.
for the state.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So I want to move to our next items if we can, but I don't want to cut off the conversation, but I just ask Councilor Danberg. You got
Just quickly, 2 quick questions. Do you know offhand what what number of units there are in the VC2 mixed use?
Not offhand, we can get that for you though.
Okay, I would like to know that. And we've removed all 30,000, over 30,000 square foot parcels?
Not from the zoning, so there was no changes to the zoning adopted by the council. What was submitted to the state for compliance does not include parcels over
Doesn't,
30,000,
okay, so
because you
just-
cannot build on them by right.
Okay,
Um,
right, that, yes. And I know one big parcel that we're looking at in Newton Center is the 36,000, I think, square feet, so
Right, so we will.
that just has to go to special permit.
Correct,
Okay, all right.
Or they could just subdivide it administratively and then do it by right.
that's correct. That, the state doesn't consider that. We did early on try and lobby them to consider subdivisions, and count that. They do not. So for their purposes, the sites, we have to work with the existing, parcel lines.
So I'm going to suggest, thank you. Any other questions, Councilor Hall?
Yeah, I just have one. So the package we submitted in December,
Mhm.
11th, 21st, whatever that was,
21st.
21st, right, I was gonna say it's 21st, did not include VC2 mixed use.
Correct.
Correct. It has the
Version.
full ordinance, but
Yeah,
not
understood.
the, yeah, but not in the workbook.
Right, not for MBTA compliance?
Correct.
Fair enough. When
So-
we resubmitted, based on the,
Yeah.
you said some minor things and so on and so forth were changed, that package went back without VC2 mixed use
Correct,
for MBTA compliance.
correct.
today you released the package, the information to the city council, which is great. I would argue, probably should have seen it sooner, but fair enough. Why didn't your memo from planning identify what was and was not included for the state's compliance for our benefit? I'm floored by this. It would have been so simple for you to simply say, hey, just like you did here, this wasn't in, here's why. This had to be out, here's why.
And that's, I think, an oversight on our part. I'm sorry, we've been living and breathing this for so long, sometimes it's hard to take a step back and think about what would be helpful for everyone else to read. So I apologize for
There are a
that.
couple of other people here who've been living and breathing it too.
No, understood. And you know, I apologize for that. We could have broken that out a little clearer in the memo.
So one request, at some point, whether it's a docketed item or a conversation, I kind of want to go through, I want to understand this with a different light, because there are things happening that kind of make sense to me and kind of don't now. And I'll be perfectly candid. The transparency isn't where, in my opinion, it needs to be.
Okay.
Right? People at this table deserve to know what's going on, what the conversation is between the planning department and the state. And I'm just gonna start asking more questions, I guess.
Sure, we're happy to answer those. Sorry, from our perspective, we didn't think anything was being hidden. There was certainly no intent to not be transparent. It's been a lot of back and forth and waiting to have a fully complete package, which, you know, we kept thinking we would have sooner with the economic analysis, which is where we know people were most interested. Unfortunately, we still don't have that. We, we're happy to answer any questions. I think we've been clear on all the conversations we've had with the state and MAPC. There isn't really anything else there that we haven't
One
discussed.
last, if I may.
Yeah.
One last, follow up, and the train is pulling away from my station quickly, so I'm hoping to grab the end of this train.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious as to so if VC2, right, mixed use isn't in, I see that, but I also want to understand the shape files, just as a request. Like, I know that, because some of the parcels that are not included, if they don't fit from a contiguity perspective, that just blows my mind, because the lot is at the end of a long stretch of compliant lots, and I need to see that in a way that
Sure.
I can.
We're happy to go through that in more detail, and there's a number of factors there. It could be the lot adjacent is more than 30,000 square feet, or, there's reasons why. It's possible we missed something too, so if there is a lot that should be counted that wasn't, happy to go through that and update the information for the state as well.
So, now, I want to move along, folks. I think I'm going to summarize where we are, and unless this is a powerful question, all questions are useful, but just so we've got other things on the item. What I'm hearing is that the planning department has made a number of decisions that were designed to frame the issue for the state in a way that got us compliance, but also went through the motions of figuring out what the inclusionary zoning ordinance did to various parcels that were smaller than what was originally anticipated. And so I think what you're hearing is a request for the kind of explanation you gave orally to be part of a memo or something that people can follow and track, and also an opportunity for individual members of the committee, and I'm happy to designate the vice chair as sort of the point person on this, to work with any other member of the committee who has questions, to do those so that we can have it reflected in a document the whole council can understand. I think that this is a helpful conversation for us, but there are obviously 16 other people who may have similar questions who just don't understand what's going on. Okay, and now I want to just give you a chance to respond if I stated it correctly.
That's correct. I would make a suggestion. We think for real this time we're getting the economic analysis. I would just, assuming that's true, suggest that we supply that memo and packet to the council hopefully we have that in the next week or so. Once we have that, because that's going to answer some of these questions. Right now there's a number of unknowns. It'd be nice to have the full package that we can button everything up.
I personally am comfortable with that, and as a member of the committee, I think that makes some sense. I would just say that there is a kind of by the numbers explanation you did orally here, which I think is helpful to everybody to understand, because there are pieces that were part of the submission, and there are opportunities for actual development that are different from what the state thinks. And so we're all looking at sort of the same thing from different lenses. So I think it's important to say, what can you build on the ground? What does the state think you can build on the ground? What does the state include for calculating compliance? And they're not necessarily the same thing, correct? Okay, I'd like to move on, but I'll just recognize Councilor Danberg.
Thank you. Just in addition, in addition to what Chairman Baker has just said, I agree that a lot of what Councilor Oliver has commented on would be helpful for the committee. Where you lost me was in the transparency, questioning the transparency issue. You're new to ZAP. Those of us who have been here for 18 years or so, 20 years in fact, have a lot of experience in working with planning and have never seen any attempt on the part of the planning department to block transparency on anything, and I would just come to the defense of the planning department on that.
Well, I don't think we have to get into that question, to be honest. I think Mr. Lamel.
Well, what I just want to say is that, and as the email I sent to the council, is that I'm happy to take any questions on the village center zoning and how it's used to meet the MBTA community's requirements and answer those questions as best as I possibly can. And we're happy to provide, memos and reports as needed. I think on the technical side of things, I want to make sure everybody is clear, and we can pull out past ZAP meetings and city council meetings, is that it has always been portrayed that the village center zoning is the tool that the city is using to meet compliance with the MBTA communities. The city council is the authority, the sole authority on any zoning change. That's what was adopted by the city council at the end of last year. What we are submitting to the state for MBTA compliance is a piece or a subset or pulled from what the city council has approved, all of what they have approved. That has been fully open and transparent for 3 years. What actually gets submitted, for state compliance is not a zoning change. It's not a city council action. There's no action for the city council to take. So maybe that's why, again, we have the complete package, and when we get it, we will answer any questions and always answer any questions that are presented to us.
I think that's fair. I think the point, though, that is that understanding that process with a document is going to be,
yes.
and I think the part of the difficulty is we're really understanding it better now when you've talked about it, and part of the value the committee performs is the service it has for the council as a whole to get that kind of information clarified. But I think the point that Councilor Oliver, as I hear it, was saying that it would have been great if we'd had that understanding of that process before now, but we've got it, and I think that we need to move on from there. So, any other, I see Councilor Krinsman's hand up.
You do, and I will move hold in just a second. But first, I want to agree with, I think, at least the sentiment of what Councilor Danberg was saying, which is that we knew all along that there were components of the VCOD that were not compliant or could not be used to comply with the MBTA Communities Act. If I'm not mistaken, the reason you took out the over 30,000 square foot parcels is because they require a special permit.
Correct.
And to be compliant with the MBTA Communities Act, it had to be by right. So, for example, you say you took those out in terms of the submission to the state. We know exactly why that is. I understand and I agree that it would be helpful to have a document that lays out what those exceptions were, why certain parcels were removed, both for members of the council, but also as members of the public look at these documents, or as we share those documents with members of the public. I think, Ms. Kyrie, I believe you mentioned it in your comments, but we knew all along that there were questions about the economic viability or feasibility of the VC2 district as modified by the city council. I think you expressed those concerns when amendments were proposed. So I don't feel taken by surprise by anything that you said tonight. But I will agree that it's helpful to have that laid out. But I think you've been transparent all along about exactly what this was, why you were doing it. And I understand that what you need to submit to the state is a subset of that, as you said, Mr. Lamel, in terms of what we believe will bring us into compliance. And it wouldn't make sense to submit something that wasn't by right, because that has nothing to do with compliance towards the ordinance, or excuse me, towards the state law. So just wanted to mention that, and I'm happy to move hold
Right,
on the
so,
item.
we have a motion to hold on 4324. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, thank you very much. And I would just ask you to work with Ms. Norton and figure out a way to produce this document, and then we can get it to the council in a way that basically tells this story in a way that even those who are not scholars of the VCOD process or its outcome will be able to follow it.
What you submitted? That 8330? I didn't think it was.
So we have
Less.
We have two items that I want to read into the record that are viewed as companion items because they're focusing on allied problems. 8524, request for discussion and possible amendments to enhance the preservation of existing homes. This is Councilors Baker, Oliver, Maliki, Kalis, Gatz, Lucas, Lobovitz, and Wright requesting a discussion and possible amendments to Chapter 30 zoning or other city ordinances to enhance the preservation of existing homes over their replacement by larger and more expensive structures. And then the companion item, which was docketed before in an earlier council, but brought back here, is 4124, amend the setbacks in MR zones, that's one specific zone, a multi-residence zone, to encourage preservation of existing buildings. That's Councilors Albright, Danberg, Krinsman, and Leary, seeking a discussion with the planning department to consider ordinance amendments that would revise the metrics in the multi-residence MR1, MR2, and MR3 zones to regulate the size of new buildings better, enable a wider range of housing options close to public transit, and better incentivize preservation and renovation of existing housing stock. So this is, is James, Livia, is she going to join us? Is she here?
She's joining us for the final, or not the final, the grading.
Oh, the grade change, okay.
Yeah, that
All right,
one.
all right, I just didn't want to leave somebody out.
Yeah,
in this.
nothing to that.
So, there's some memos in the packet, but can you take us through what we're really being asked to give advice as members of the committee about how to approach this? And let me just say one other thing that I've mentioned to the department, which is that you'll see a little bit more about that in the item that's coming up on grade changes, which is to also help us think about things that we can do in the short term and other things that will take more time or are more complex, because I would like to see what we can do early and then figure out what takes more time in both of these, and then also the next item. So who's on deck on this one? Mr. Lamel?
I think I'm happy to start the conversation or continue from reading these into the record. So what we're really looking for is some direction from the committee here, so that we can do more work and ideally lead to some sort of analysis and proposals. I think these two items can be framed in a variety of different ways. They can be framed in the positive, they can be framed in the negative, they can be framed in, and I laid this out in the memo, what it could be new, there's multiple problems and multiple possible solutions, and I think we don't wanna go down a path that isn't driven by this committee. And I could maybe summarize those just in the memo.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to new homes, there needs to be, I think, a prioritization. Is it the loss of moderately priced homes? And that there wants to be, the goal is to create an opportunity for either existing starter homes to be maintained as starter homes, or for the new development or new construction of starter homes. Is that the goal? Is it the goal that the newly developed homes are more in line with the neighborhoods that they are fitting within? Is it that new homes are, you know, more environmentally friendly? You know, we know that these bigger homes come with a lot of, as we'll talk about, grading and site issues. There's a lot of trees that are torn down. There's a lot of paving that's added. Or is it that there's just a kind of additional housing typology that is missing within the city? We have single-family homes, we have two-family homes, we have these large-scale rental or condo buildings, but there is that missing middle, again, which I guess goes back to the starter home type of thing. What is the committee's goal with these items? And then we could come forward with, again, eventual zoning amendments. Because depending on what the priorities are, that will change what the actual zoning amendments we bring forward to you are.
I have my own views on that, but I want to hear from members of the committee first. Anyone want to, who's a co-docketer on the first item? Let's take the first item first.
All of the above.
Yeah, right.
But another thing is, two specific things I'd like to have looked at. If someone tears down the house, they should have to abide by.
I'm sorry, I apologize for interrupting. Counselor Albright is trying to get into City Hall to come join the meeting. Can someone, it sounds like the doors are locked. Can someone let her in?
It's locked.
We're on,
Sorry about that.
which door is she at?
Well, we'll
The
find
front
out.
door.
Which one? We have to cover both.
So, two other things that we didn't cover in there is, I'd like to see if we can do something, if someone tears down a lot or a house, that they have to do the new lot standards and setbacks, instead of just the old lots. And the second one, which I think is irking, especially Nantum, is if you have a house in the BU district or a building, and you're gonna tear it down and put all housing on there, that's not BU anymore. Shouldn't you then, maybe does the zoning change to, it's now all residential? Or they need to put, commercial on the first floor and have residential above it. But there's a lot of people gaming the system in doing that. And I'd like to see that addressed too.
That's good.
So, let me just comment if I can, because I was one of the doctors on the first item. Councilor Albright, welcome.
Hi,
You
the front
managed
door
to-
is very nice, I spent a lot of time there tonight.
I'm so distressed, I didn't, there needs to be a mechanism.
It's like a doorbell.
A doorbell.
Doorbell.
If only there were a device that alerted us to the fact that you were there.
There.
It's happened before though.
It has, yeah, as far as that means.
So let me just indicate at least my, part of the reason that I was the doctor of the first item is that while we have as the memo points out, an inventory of about 100 buildings that go through demolition, what I've understood is that the challenge of being a new purchaser into the city, those homes are being basically snapped up by developers who are taking them offline, and there's entry-level housing is really almost not a correct term, but at least less expensive housing for new families to buy in that is already there, and rather than have to buy something that's newly built. And while we work very hard to get affordable units in new construction, as you know, just when we're discussing about our inclusionary zoning ordinance, my concern is we're losing slowly but steadily part of the lower cost inventory of housing that we have. And I'd like to see the planning department respond with something that would enable that lower cost inventory to be maintained. Now, when it's done and if it isn't maintained and it is torn down because it's not an historic structure, then there's a question of what should replace it. And what obviously part of the calculus is that the replacement structure is more profitable and it's more expensive than what it displaced. So, but my preference is to try and at least try and maintain as much of that initial affordability opportunity that we have. Affordability is probably the wrong word, but it's the only one I can, it's less unaffordable. Is maybe the better way to describe it. But that's my preference as a policy.
So, and there, it's really getting at that calculation of the new being more profitable than what, so that, you know, a builder, a developer is looking at how much does it cost me to buy this, and then how much will it cost me to build something new, and then what can I sell that for? And to get at that, you're really looking at restricting what can be built. So there are a lot of things to weigh there. You know, this has come up in the past, and I think a lot of people would like to see that housing preserved. There's also a lot of people that don't want to see their property values impacted by that. So it is a tricky thing to navigate that, you know, many communities have struggled with. So we certainly can dig into that some more. I just want to be upfront about what you're looking at is really restricting what can be built, which then does actually impact property values.
But I think the important point and understand is that zoning restricts what you can build almost by definition anywhere.
It does, it's further restricting.
Yeah,
So people are, you know, have a assumption today of what their property may be worth. It would be further restricting what could be built there so that it's not attractive to tear something down. And so if that's the direction the committee wants to go, we certainly can pursue that. I just want to be very clear that there's not really a magic tool to keep what's existing and not impact property values or what, you know, ultimately could be built.
Let me just provide one other piece of history, and apologies, folks, I don't need to do this often, but you all know that we have the FAR rules that apply the floor area ratio throughout the city. Initially, several years ago, I think several of us were on the council when the problem was that the rule was framed that if you kept half of the house, you could do a partial demolition and then rebuild. And what was happening is people were keeping 2 or 3 rooms and then building this gigantor structure around it. And that certainly made those properties very valuable, but the council took the position that, you know, the FAR rules should apply across the board, not in just an exception situation, and it modified the development opportunities in those houses, and I think to the betterment of the city. So it's not that we haven't done this sort of thing before when it was in the interest of preserving. And if you go to the second option you mentioned, like saying, how does this fit into the neighborhood? Again, you're looking at a potential limitation on something, but you do that, the idea in zoning is that you give up some of your rights because the neighbor has some of their rights given up, and that's, generally you do better together than you would individually. So we want to be very careful about that, and I think you're very right to point out that this is not, you know, an easy call, but it's one that I think I'd like to see, at least myself, the department and the committee address and figure out if there's a way forward that could command a sufficient number of votes on the council to adopt, recognizing that there are going to be some people who say, I like the system the way it is because I can make more money that way, and that's fine. But that's the challenge we all have anytime we deal with a restriction on opportunity for the general good, and that's what this is about. So that's my Thank you. Others, committee? Recognize Councilor Albright, who's just joined us. How nice of you to join us. And we're so glad that you got a lot of fresh air. And,
Lots of,
So I'm sympathetic to the cause, but sometimes there are houses, like there's a house right next to the cemetery on Commonwealth Avenue. It's a one-story kind of a ranch. And it's slowly deteriorated over time, and I knew that that was gonna be right for this kind of happening. And eventually, and finally, there's a fence around it now. But the house was really quite downhill, quite dilapidated. So it was appropriate, probably, to do something with that house and give it a new life. Tear it down and start all over again, because it was gone. So some of these things are wrong, and some of them are right, and I don't know how you make a rule that applies to those kinds of things.
I don't think you can, what I'm talking about is not necessarily preventing those tear downs completely, because then that's a demolition and historic district. But to say you don't want the tear down to occur just because the economics, take one unit and make it into two, and two bigger ones that are much more expensive, because that's the way the economics drive. If you said that house needs to be rebuilt, then look at it as a rebuild opportunity, but not necessarily on a bigger footprint or two units or whatever can happen. So that doesn't mean that you can't do that, I think, but I guess the question is, can we try and provide a structure that will help preserve as many of those opportunities, but still leave open the possibility that you described where something's just so run down it needs to be replaced. Any other comments from the committee?
Yeah.
Councilor Diaz.
This is, where I'm thinking about carrot and stick, just in terms of like incentivizing, as the adaptive reuse does, in terms of keeping the existing house. And I would like for us to sort of bolster the toolbox, in terms of being able to, offer builders and homeowners the opportunity to do more on their property, if in fact they keep the existing structure. And I also think that we need to think about public-private partnerships, but that's at the level of the developers. But there's quite a few, opportunities, especially I'm looking like in, higher density regions like in DC and Arlington, where they do implement something like this. But I just, you've got a farm and a finite amount of build that you can put on that lot, and you can decrease it, so that then, like with some of the lots, there's that magic kind of like, it's actually the size of the lot that incentivizes the keeping of that property, that house. And you see that throughout the, the neighborhoods. But I just, I think if you can identify incentives, regionally, that would be helpful in terms of keeping the smaller, short of, putting in place something like what I've seen in some local communities is that they actually, the preservation restrictions, and I think that's, or, you've got like a conservation district, something like that. So I think that I'd like to look on that side of the equation, that would be helpful.
Let me recognize other people, I'm sorry. Did you, Councilor?
She's a member, I'm not.
Well,
it's all right, you haven't spoken, go ahead.
Thank you.
she's very gracious to yield to you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Let me start with a very basic notion. I'm as much a capitalist as anybody here or anybody I know. Listening to developers say we can't make money on some of these projects, I just don't buy. You can't make as much money necessarily, but there are ways to save these homes where you can in fact make money. And maybe we need to be looking at some nonprofit developers to do this. I don't know, but the loss of these homes, and when you look at this map and the ward that I represent, I would bet 40% of them are below in Ward 8. And it's just every single day, another inhabited house is being sold in wonderful condition. It may need new bathrooms, it may need new kitchens, but they're being sold and torn down and replaced with buildings that have no lots, no side, no front, no back. They've cleared every tree on the lot. And I just don't think that that's necessary. And I certainly don't think it's appropriate amongst a group of people representing the larger audience in this city who say we want affordable housing. There's nothing affordable in the law that the state wants us to do to meet the VCOD. When they say you can't go above 10%, and when you say you can't go below 80%, that excludes a lot of people. And it's that kind of thinking that I think is really, we may have to do it with the state, but I don't think we need to do it with our own properties. And I would like to see us find some innovative ways, and I have some thoughts on it, much too complex to express here, but the very notion, there must be ways that we can help owners who deserve to get a market rate for their house, but still be able to purchase it some way that would allow us to encourage developers to come in who can afford to fix the bathrooms, fix the kitchens, and make it a less than $1.5 million house, which is hard in Ward 8 because they're selling for 1.6 in order to be knocked down. But I'm not concerned about the developers. They're going to make money, and I encourage them to make money. But we need to really be serious about wanting affordable housing, for wanting younger, newer families to move into this city, to be able to afford to own a home, send their kids to school, pay their property taxes, and live a good life here. So that's my basic notion about all of this. I wish I'd been smart enough in my first 6 weeks to understand co-signing these, because I would have co-signed both of these.
Docket items, yeah, docket.
Thank you very much. See, I'm still learning. Anyhow, and I think there are a lot of people certainly, and all I can talk about is Ward 8, because that's where I've been and talking to people. People really are tired of seeing these monsters go up to them with no fields, no trees, no yards, and that are ugly to be very, they don't look like the rest of the neighborhood. And I think that's something we should be concerned about too, in order to maintain neighborhoods. And I think that helps maintain the financial structure of the neighborhood when you've got similar housing and people are living in that. So thank you for letting me speak.
Sure. Thank you. And again, welcome to the conversation. Councilor Denver.
Thank you. Councilor Farrell has said a lot of things that I agree with, that I think need to be said, and that are valuable to hear and valuable for us to try and strive for. I have in my notes Ward 8, because Ward 8 is really the poster child for what we're talking about here. At post-war, it was a wonderful post-war soldiers trying to come back and start their families. The houses were small and affordable, and it was a wonderful neighborhood that allowed that to happen. What we have here inside 128 especially, and even outside 128, is that anything close to Boston is the land is so expensive that it becomes too valuable to have a small home on anymore. And the owners, who many of whom have owned since World War II or post-war, have now sold in Ward 8. You see what has happened in Ward 8, and right, the homes that have replaced these houses are mega structures that have been built as large as they can be built on those small lots. I'm not sure that that I would want to stop people whose single asset is their home from maximizing what they can get. It would be nice if they could maximize it by having a family buy that home. But the value is so high that if you're paying 1.6 million for a 3-bedroom house, ranch house, you then have to put another large amount of chunk of money in it to redo the bathrooms and the kitchens, put a new roof on and everything else. And a lot of families who are struggling to buy anything in Newton can't afford to do that anymore. I don't have an answer to that. I think that what I would like to see happen is for us to be able to keep or maintain as many of these homes as possible. And one of the ways that we can do it, I think, is by in areas that we now allow 2-family, where we have some of these older homes that need work and that a developer will come in and purchase, to incentivize that developer to keep the main structure and add another unit onto it, because that will help with our goal of attempting to add additional units into a neighborhood that will be a kind of a gentle addition of units into neighborhoods in Newton. Very often these additions can be built in the back, to the rear, to the side, where you can maintain the streetscape. And I think that it's very important that we keep streetscapes and that we keep homes that fit into the existing neighborhoods. I'm very much in favor of that. But I wish I had the answer to that. I don't think any of us do, but I think that there are things that we can do, like large house review. One of the problems is a small, even what we would call a starter home built on a substantial lot. And we have no way to protect that house on a lot, and those are on a larger lot, because the developers will come in and just demolish all of these. We're losing all of our homes, smaller homes on larger lots. And if we could build onto those homes, keep those homes and build onto those homes with additional units, that would be one way that we could keep existing stock.
So other comments? And I want to make a comment myself. Councilor Albright?
So the discussion reminds me of what we tried to do, not in the last term, but the term before that, was to allow people to take their single-family homes and make them into 2-family homes.
Right.
And I think, if you recall correctly, I think the city blew up over that idea.
Yep, good.
So let's walk with our eyes wide open into something that we want to do, that's all I'm saying. But it's a good idea, but there was a lot of controversy about it.
Let me comment.
Let me just, if I could say one comment to that, and that is that we could start with the lots in the areas that are MR1, let's say, that would allow that by law in the existing zoning.
It's a fair comment. I guess my concern about any development incentive that you're talking about basically, again, gets your purchasers then are developers who are looking at the process of taking the building and doing something with it. I'm interested in a solution that tends to keep at least the building opportunity available for entry-level purchasers. And some people, I will tell you, I bought a house with old bathrooms and low ceilings, and I've managed to live in it for a long time. And so it doesn't mean that you automatically have to go into the heavy renovation business. But I think that entry-level opportunity, without necessarily going into new construction, because that's going to be, as I think we all understand, is going to be more expensive to buy, and that's part of the affordability option, it seems to me. So while there are some development opportunities, as you've indicated, I want to be very cautious about doing that, because that just puts us in a different frame for the same outcome, it seems to me, which is taking those properties offline.
Well, I just want to add a couple points of information. One is, I know that the demolitions across the city are not equal. However, are not equal.
Okay.
However, the vast majority of sales of single and 2-family homes still go to homeowners, families. You know, with the 100 homes that are being demolished per year are a fraction of the sales, close to 10% of what's being. So most sales are still going to, I'll just say families, even though it could be a wide range of people. We can provide more of that information down the road, and we can work with assessors on it. I think what we're looking for, again, with more information is if you say, you know, we're looking to create opportunities for starter homes, then we could say, from a new development standpoint, this is what that looks like. And that's just math, to quote Councilor Oliver, right? That's just math.
Just math?
That's just math.
Math,
Math,
I'm sorry, I
math.
just
There
didn't.
is, this is this, that you're gonna pay this much for the piece of property, this is what you can build on it, this is how many units, and I divide, this is how much this is how much I need to make for it to work, and I divide it by the number of units, and that's how much each unit gets sold for. So if the council and the committee kind of says, you know, starter homes are what we wanna create, going in eyes wide open, I think as a few of you have said, is it's not a single family home. It doesn't, or it's a very, very small single family home that you're allowing. That's the development potential that you're allowing. When it comes to adaptive reuse, you mentioned MRT. I mean, essentially the city council just did that with the multi-residence transit district. There could be ways to expand that, tied with some of the things that the docket item is reducing the development potential for single-family homes and two-family homes. In the memo on page 3, we talked about applying new lot standards. That's something Councilor Wright and Councilor Baker looked at a few years ago, and it didn't lead us anywhere. So I would advise not to go down that road again. There's a lot of other things we can look at, but again, I think it's really a matter of what is the thing, what that you're looking to accomplish, and then we can dive deeper into possible solutions.
So let me, Councilor Oliver hadn't spoken.
He was up. Let Stephen go first,
Okay,
or
all right,
Councilor
so
Farrar
members
go
of
first.
the committee
So,
will be
all
very-
so differential, I appreciate it very much. One of the things I would like to understand is how many pieces of land the city owns from which it gets no revenue at the moment. For instance, there is a piece of land on Jackanac Street off of Winchester. It's probably 60 by 60 feet. And it's surrounded by conservation land. But that little piece of land, if the zoning was appropriate, could sustain a small single-family home, I believe. I think that's all just part of the zoning about how many feet you're gonna require for stuff, but you'd be surrounded by beautiful conservation land. I'd love to know how many other opportunities like that there might be, where the city would say, okay, you get a mortgage to build a house, and we'll contribute the land. What's Jamie Dimon's bank in New York? I never remember the name.
JP Moore.
JP Morgan, thank you. They have a plan like this,
Sure.
where if the city's willing to give up the land as their part of it, they will not only, they'll offer the mortgage at a really low interest rate to encourage people to buy and develop. I mean, I don't know whether Newton can do this kind of thing or not, but it would be interesting to go to some banks that Newton banks with and said, here's an idea that exists, would you be willing to give us 100 mortgages a year for 3% instead of 7%? I have no idea, I'm not a finance person, but just looking at the land, what's out there, is it generating anything for the city right at the moment? Would it be better to have a really small but nice little house, maybe built by a nonprofit developer, with a bank saying we'll give you a low interest rate? I mean, that sort of thing.
Through the chair, what's the name of the street?
Jackanac, Jaconnett. I
So,
know it well because there's been a lot of flooding on that street because Meadow Brook was breached. And thanks to the DPW and ISD, they've fixed it. They've cleared out a couple of natural dams that were created. No, these weren't beavers. These weren't beavers.
Oh, that was the other.
well, let me,
Yeah.
We don't get into beavers. I'm working with beavers
in
too.
the interest of time, I think that one of the challenges that you pointed out is that zoning is designed to be district-wide, and you're talking about a special situation for specific parcels, which may be appropriate, but I think it's a different question than preserving the housing stock we have.
Oh, I do too.
Okay, I just want to clarify that there are different objectives that we may have in mind, which is facilitating some small new development, which is what Mr. Vermel was talking about, and that's a version of that, versus the preservation. And I don't want to lose sight, even though I think it's valuable to think about.
I agree with you completely, because we don't want to see the loss of so many more of these houses in Ward 8, for sure. I think there are a lot of people, stunningly, who can afford 1.8 million as opposed to 3 million. And they're able to get the mortgages for it. And I don't know whether the city could say, if we had properties like this, and maybe out of our housing trust, we were able to grant a loan of $25,000 to $50,000 in order to get the mortgage with the bank, then give us a loan at a lower interest rate to make 1.7, 1.8 feasible, which would include purchase plus maybe a new bathroom. Because I don't know, but I mean,
This is fair, but that's, I don't think part of the docket item is currently.
I thought that was stating.
We're talking about trying to preserve the existing housing.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. But that may be a way of doing, preserving the existing housing stock, which talks about an individual purchaser, but not necessarily building something new, which is a different model.
No.
So I just want to clarify.
No.
So,
Two different things.
no, two different things. Councilor Oliver?
Great, thank you. So it does seem to me that, I don't know what's going up on the lot that you brought up next to the cemetery, right? I don't know, but it does seem to me, and Mr. Lamel brought up MRT. I personally think MRT is one of the highlights of what we just did with the VCOD. I think there's a lot of potential there. But like Councilor Baker is bringing up, it's the single, to me, right, it's preserving those, I think they're predominantly gonna be, like, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but they're gonna be predominantly, SRs, right? Where we have an opportunity to take an existing home and figure out how we can, and as was pointed out earlier, I haven't been on ZAP for long, but I get the process. So I don't know what the dimensional controls that were looked at before that, I'd love to pick that up and listen to it or read it. But it does seem to me that it's the, I think of what's going on in Nonantum, for example, and being able to figure out how we can reasonably control what a lot of people would describe as an out-of-control rebuild, tear down, and what's going up. That's one thing, right? And I think it's a combination of attacking several of these different challenges that we see, and that's where we need to lean in to say, what are the options that are out there? What might make sense to so that we can modify some of the, the BU, some of the MR, some of the SR, so that we have the opportunity to retain existing structures and not, this is the theme, not incentivize or allow to be incentivized something that, I don't know, isn't exactly appropriate on every single lot across the city. Anyway, I don't know if that's constructive or helps guide or tie a few of these points together, but it does seem to me there are different solutions because we've already identified at least 3 or 4 different, I don't love that idea all the time, right? Ward 8, single family homes that are deteriorating that need to come down and be rebuilt. Perhaps as a single family or a 2-family in a single family envelope, I think is a fair way to put it. Nonantum separately, there are different instances that we can chip away at.
I think, let me just try and summarize at least where I am on this. I think that there are two different paths. I'm sorry, who's the hand up there? I'm sorry.
Julie
Councilor
Maliki.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. Councilor Maliki.
Oh, thank you very much. Let's see. First of all, I think you know, I was involved when we were trying to have a tear down moratorium back in, what was it, 2014? So this goes back a long time. But basically, I think we have, and the incentives in our current system are really at odds with, you know, what we claim to be our values of wanting to have, you know, diverse economics and environmental responsibility. We're incentivizing people to neglect their houses. I know, I've heard from people I know who are decent, nice people who say, why should I put any work into my house? Developer's just gonna buy it and tear it down. So that's the kind of mindset we've inculcated in people. And I think Councilor Baker alluded to this, that just the existence of zoning puts some limits on what you can do with your property. And in exchange, you get predictability and you get some benefits of not having crazy stuff go up next door to you. I don't think the purpose of zoning is to let people maximize the resale value of their property. As I said, it's really at odds with our other values of wanting people not as wealthy to be able to buy into Newton. And it should be to have an option more than just, you know, an apartment or a condo where you're subject to who knows what the condo association is doing. The environmental aspect includes the size of the houses. It's not just that we're allowing very big houses to be built. When you have a very big house, you buy stuff to fill it up. People didn't used to routinely live in, you know, 6,000, 5,000 square foot houses. When you have a house that big, you're just buying more stuff that's contributing to all the waste, the production costs, the transportation costs of America's consumption. I think at a minimum, we ought to be applying new lot standards when changes, maybe any changes are being made to, maybe we should just have new lot standards. And I think they, in aspects like setbacks, I think we ought to be stricter, have larger setbacks, especially side setbacks. We're losing green space, we're losing trees. We've got builders maximizing the footprints of houses. They're cutting down trees to install the required underground containment systems for the stormwater containment that they're required to do by the bigger footprints, instead of just keeping the trees and the grass that we've got that people enjoy and contribute all the other benefits in terms of cooling the air and getting rid of air pollution. We're replacing natural stormwater containment with these tanks that who knows how well they're going to be working in 20 or 30 years, because is anybody really checking them? I doubt it. I think those are the main points I wanted to hit. Thank you.
Thank you. So it seems to me that we've got two different items and there may be two different responses. One is the question of some dimensional controls on what gets built that may change the calculus so that the larger, more expensive structures don't get built to replace something, right? That's one piece. The other question is there a legitimate place for a small development starter, which is a new construction, but where is that an MR situation under special conditions where there's a buffer to it, such as Councilor Farrell has talked about, where there could be an experiment or a pilot or something like that. In other words, but what we're getting right now seems to be the worst of both worlds, which we're getting big new structures that are not affordable, so we're not getting either. And so I think that it would be useful for the department to look at both of those questions, if that's the sense of the committee. And I don't want to lose sight of because there's always going to be, I think, someone who's interested in the development option, but I think it has to be, we have to think about limiting the opportunity first before we start offering new options. Otherwise, we're just going to, instead of replacing the structures in Ward 8 with big single-family structures, we'll replace them with big multifamily structures, and you're gonna end up with the same difficulty. So I think that I think this is a conversation to continue, but I think that there are two different issues we ought to try and get the department to respond to. Is that fair? Okay.
Are we also talking about changing or examining the setbacks for single-family homes? Not just
Yeah,
the
I would
MR,
think
but
you'd
also-
have to do that too,
Yeah.
because the same problem we're seeing in the MR districts, which are, and part of the underlying question of this, I think it's important to mention for the MRs, because a lot of those turned out to be the multi-residents, in the Village District, the MRTs, excuse me, we got too many MRs here. The MRTs were designed to offer an opportunity for some adaptive reuse there with along these lines, but the incentive structure is still to tear the building down and go the old route. And so part of, as I understood, the genesis of this second item was to change the incentive structure so that, at least in the MRT districts, somebody might make the choice for adaptive reuse rather than a tear down, right? I recall Councilor Crossley talking about that when she was on the committee. So it seems to me that is part of the second strand that you may look at. So you might end up with the first strand on how do you preserve the existing structures. The second is how do you incentivize in those places we want to, the adaptive reuse of smaller, less expensive property.
And I think what I'm hearing is, in the first strand of this, is how to preserve the existing buildings, but also potentially how to make sure if something new is built, maybe the setbacks are more appropriate.
And the scale and
Right, so that
the
it
site
is,
preservation. I
you know,
mean,
looking
the
at-
consistency with the neighborhood.
Yeah, got it.
Many years ago, we looked at there's an averaging process that you can use, I think, for setbacks under our current zoning. But for a while, we were looking at sort of trying to figure out what the neighborhood context is. And the problem is in Ward 8, the neighborhood context is changing so fast that you may not want to use that anymore. But I think the point is that it really is, even though these are only 100, they stand out and they're constantly being the conversational points for members of the council when we run into citizens who say, this is what I don't want to see in my city. And so I think that's, yeah.
When you talk about the 100, are you talking about what the
100 on the list that are demolished every year.
The historic preservation?
No, this list here.
This,
Yeah.
but we do recall that historic preservation goes out and reviews, there at one point, when this group was talking about changing the law from 50 years to 75 years. Demolition. That there was a group of some 3,500 houses at that point. That historic preservation would go out and review.
Yep.
And I mean, there's somebody out there doing some of the work for us. They must have some criteria for why something is worth preserving and why something isn't worth preserving, just as another point.
Yes, and that just, I don't think we've talked too much about that effort in this committee since then, but we're wrapping up one grant from MHC, the Massachusetts Historical Commission, to do that work, and just applied for a second round of grants to continue that work. So we have started to do that, to survey those properties that were between the 50 and 75 years. And that has been underway. That's still, where that has helped is making a stronger case for putting a demolition delay. It doesn't necessarily prevent it from being demolished at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, this is something I would hope the city will look at sometime soon, but anyhow, if I may just make, when that conversation was going on with zoning and planning a few years ago, there was a concern that there wasn't enough money to do more than 100 houses a year. And it seems to me that this is something that would be of interest both to realtors and preservationists. And that maybe realtors could be incentivized to chip into that process. and make more than 100 houses a year get reviewed. I don't know, just throw it on the table.
Thank you. Councilor Malik, your hand is still up as I see it, is that? Okay, I want to be sensitive to.
Oh, I did, there was one more question I had. Mr. Lamel mentioned that only 10% of, that houses that are torn down are only 10% of all sales in the city, but I think it might be more useful to look at it in terms of price brackets. And they may be skewed toward the lowest selling points because so many of the houses that sell are, new builds, and the bigger houses are somewhat less likely to get torn down, although not always. Thanks.
Okay. So, the department, do you have enough of a sense of where we might go with this, or do you want?
I think so, but I think this committee already looked at changing the setbacks to new lot standards, and it really didn't prevent the type of development that people didn't want.
It may be that.
We could broaden that, of course.
It may be the dimensional controls, the FAR has to come down,
I think you can't accomplish this without touching FAR.
Right.
You need to reduce FAR.
And
And it should be in combination with setbacks, so that when something is appropriate to be torn down and is rebuilt, what's rebuilt is more in context with
I
what's
think
there.
if you were to look at the structures in Ward 8 that Councilor Farrell was talking about, the FAR, the setbacks itself wouldn't solve the problem, as I hear it. And so it may be there are other dimensional controls or open space requirements or something else that may need to be adjusted.
Sure.
But something that will give us a sense that we're likely to change that calculus where someone takes a small structure and makes it a big expensive one. That's really what we're talking about.
So I think, so that's clear. So going in, that a reduction in FAR is a part of this analysis.
Yeah.
That's number one. And then I think number two, which is maybe not to be answered right now, is this a starter home or naturally affordable? If there's a price point that this committee is looking for a certain family size on a new family home, and doing these changes would result in, let's say, a smaller home in Ward 8 not being torn down, but the sale price is still above what you're looking to create, then what?
I think that, I think you can, my own view is that it's probably going to be less expensive, right? But it's not going to be inexpensive.
Right.
So that problem, I think you have to deal with the subsidy. I don't think you get in that with another tool, but I think that.
I'm not sure. I think it just depends on, if you were to say to me, we'd love to see a 1,500 square foot house for $750,000. Again, is it possible? I don't know. But if it is, then is that what you want to see or not? And I think we just don't know we don't know from all of you what you're looking for at that end. I think we can say one thing is to preserve the existing home. So that means to de-incentivize what you can build new. But if the other priority is that home that you save is still $1 million at the end of the day, and you're looking to find starter homes for more affordable pricing, then what's the solution there? And in my understanding, that's some form of adaptive reuse, it's some form of possibly new construction. And the question is that where the committee wants to go or not?
In my judgment, I would say I'm not interested in that for the preservation part, the smaller structure. I'm talking about neighborhoods we're talking about, and I think those need to be preserved as well. The question of the price point, that may not produce a price point just because of the nature of the city and the way it goes, and that's where the other side of the equation may be where you get the lower numbers, and Ms. Karen?
One thing too, we're gonna need the assistance of the council as this moves forward. We just spent 3 years in extensive effort targeted on 3% of the city, and that outreach was a huge undertaking. This has far broader implications. I think you're right that this is addressing an issue that is at the top of a lot of people's concerns in the city, but being able to engage, you know, 90% of the city on these changes is going to be rather challenging. So we really need the council to be partners with us in moving forward with this and talking to people and helping do that outreach, because we cannot accomplish that alone.
So, I want to get to the second item here about the toadstool houses in the
Yes.
minute. So, other comments before? Right.
One quick one.
Let me just go back to Councilor Wright, who hasn't spoken for a while,
So
and then I'll go to Councilor
this
Danberg.
outreach is, I think, a little bit different from what we just went with BCOD. That was, you know, adding a lot of density, over 25%, I would say even more, onto the city in the 3% of the area versus, I think, more residents, except for the builders and the developers. I think most residents would like to see something like this.
We can't make that assumption. So I think if what we normally hear with most efforts is, you know, how do people know about this? What sort of engagement, what sort of outreach has there been, et cetera. I'm just saying for something this affects such a large area of the city, I'm not saying it's not worth doing. I think this is an important issue and this is one we should address. That is far more extensive, and we can't just assume that everyone will support it, because we've started to go down this road in the past as well, and that was not always the response. I personally have seen fistfights break out over this issue in previous jobs. So people do feel strongly about the value of their property and maybe planning on that as, you know, someone mentioned their asset. Again, that doesn't mean we should be allowing giant homes that are completely out of context to be built, just saying this is a sensitive issue, and I think it is something that we will need assistance on.
Just point out that we did this when we did the FAR,
Yeah.
you know, 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we may not get to a solution, but I think the question is, can we talk about it and figure out a way that we can go forward? I want to recognize Councilor Danberg and then Councilor Albright. It's freezing outside. And then I'll go back to Councilor Farrell, and then I'd like to move hold on there, entertain a motion to hold.
A comment to what the planning department has suggested, and Zach Lamel, for example, said in his question, what is it that you want us to look at, and what are your thoughts on it, and how can we move forward with it? If one of the things that we would like to have happen in the city is for, let's say, a single-family home would go for, and I think $750,000 is probably getting to be unreasonable now, but let's say under $1 million. One way that we could achieve that is by allowing a structure that is in keeping with the size of structures in the neighborhood, but instead of having one unit, you would have 2 or 3 units.
This is again, Councilor Albright has pointed out, I think that this is going down a path that I'm not sure I want to go.
Well,
so I will just tell you, we've been,
in certain areas.
In certain, I would add in certain areas.
Yeah.
In my own neighborhood, I'm MR1, and several houses have been torn down in my neighborhood and replaced with slightly larger homes, but instead of being a single-family home, there are 3 and sometimes 4 units, and you can't tell that it looks like a single-family home. It looks like every other house in the neighborhood. It doesn't, it's not a tall, square, flat roofed, building. It's a Victorian-looking structure, but it's got 3 units in it, that will sell for less than that, property would sell for, were it just 1 unit.
So, I wanna move on, but I wanna recognize Councilor Albright.
So I like the way you framed this with, there are 2 goals, one is preservation and one is, you know, affordability. And I'm not sure what your reason for docketing this item, was it just the preservation of the existing structures?
No, it was the sense that these structures are being torn down and replaced by more expensive ones, so it's a combination. It's a combination that the new buildings are significantly more expensive than what was there before. And second, that they're also losing the smaller, sort of neighborhood piece, and as Councilor Farrell has indicated. So I think both goals are in mind. What the department is asking is, there will be trade-offs in some solutions, and one is going to do one more than the other. And what is the, you know, and there are 2 different strands that I hear the conversation going to. One is a greater development opportunity, which is I'm very cautious about, but there's the question of middle housing, which is basically the MRT model. And then there's the issue of saying, how do we keep the existing structures from being torn down and replaced by bigger ones, which may involve dimensional controls, and that it will not make them cheap, but it will make them less likely to be replaced by expensive new builds.
Mhm.
So that's sort of where I am. I don't know if that's any clearer.
Yeah, no, that's pretty clear. But I think, for me personally, my goal would also be to look at the affordability. And I don't think anything that's 1.5 and up, 1 million and up is, you know, you're leaving out all the middle class. The middle class is leaving Newton, and so if we even want to keep the middle class, we have to try both angles, the affordability and the preservation.
Well, it may be coincident, and right now we're not serving either. So that's part of what we're
So
wrestling with.
but in terms of giving them some guidance,
Yeah.
I would love to see both things addressed in some way.
Councilor Carroll, one last word?
Just very quickly, not for nothing, but I'm a ward counselor and I like being a ward counselor. And I will do anything you need to help you find out what's going on in Ward 8 and what people feel about this kind of issue. Tell me the questions you want to ask and I will ask them. And I may invite you out to come speak to people.
Okay, all right, so I would entertain from Councilor Krinsman or anyone else who's so inclined, a motion to hold these 2 items, and we'll bring them back after. And I will, if it's indulgent in the committee, check in with the planning department, so that we figure out a place and time to bring it back, and we've got something to report that's meaningful as options, and then we'll figure that out. Councilor Krinsman, by any chance, you wish to move forward?
Yes, sir. I thought you were gonna ask for a motion to hold the existing homes, but instead I'll move to hold the 2 items.
Thank you very much. So a motion to hold 8524 and 4124. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we have it. The next item is somewhat related in the sense we're talking about what happens to neighborhoods and how the context works. I'm just going to read this. This is 7624. Discussion and possible ordinance to deal with grade changes creating during construction causing stormwater runoff on neighboring properties. Councilor Albright, Lipoff, Wright, and Leary requesting a discussion with the planning department to address concerns relative to the trend of significantly raising grade elevations on lots, using retaining walls, terracing, and other means to add soil to conceal a raised basement, which can now lead to new buildings that are significantly taller than Nilbry houses in the area and cause denuding of wooden areas and increased stormwater runoff. This discussion may result in an ordinance change to Chapter 30, Section 5.4.2, which would require a special permit or other means of city review of all retaining walls over 4 feet on a site. Now, this is, Councilor Albright, you were the lead docketer on this one, and Councilor Wright is also here. You want to say a word about this or wait to hear the department's response?
I'll just say that this has been on my list for a very long time. I think back in the days when, I don't know, Marcy was the chair of the committee, and I remember bringing something, because Wellesley has an ordinance, or a bylaw, I guess it would be, that reviews all grade changes, all any size retaining wall, as opposed to ours, which is just in the setback, 4 feet. So, and then in the last term, we heard from the Ward 1 folks about that horrible situation where the man has like a wall.
Yeah, 40 feet
Yeah.
or something, yeah.
Is
So,
this,
I mean,
is that over
this
in Honeywell
really-
Hill, is that the one?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and yeah, so you have the picture of what's, all the variations that need to be addressed.
And, so this is, Ms. James, are you part of this party? Would you like to come join come us up to the table and?
Yeah. I will share my screen if it's, am I enabled?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, cool, okay.
Grab a chair right there.
So,
Oh, okay.
first thing we need to do is get you place to sit down first. All right.
And you are this one?
Over here. I work for the planning department.
Ellen,
I'll introduce
want to just say your name loudly for the public and the members of the committee? Okay,
Yes, okay, just.
just say who you are so the mic will pick you up.
I'm Olivia James. I don't know where exactly to look, but there it is.
There you are. Okay. Great, okay, thank you.
I work in the planning department. It's nice to meet everyone. Let me get this going here. Okay, great. So we want to talk about some issues surrounding grading and retaining walls. It's an item that came before the committee a few years ago, as you mentioned, Councilor Albright. It was put aside for village centers, and now we're picking it back up again. So we're going to go over some background, what the existing regulations are that are affecting this issue, what the issues are that we've identified, some potential solutions and next steps, and then questions that we have for the committee, and then opening it up to the floor. So, some of the issues that we are seeing now with the grading and retaining wall ordinances as they are that sites are being maxed out. Developers have figured out how to manipulate the height and FAR by using grading and retaining walls, and this is now impacting neighborhoods and making incongruent situations between one house and a neighboring one. And so some of the existing regulations that are enabling this to happen is that the zoning ordinance currently sets a maximum height and floor area limits for a new single and two-family house, and the height is measured from the average finished grade elevation around the building. And then for the grading and retaining walls, grading used to be controlled by special permit. This ended up creating complications that ultimately made it really difficult to even plant a tree. And so in 2009, City Council got rid of the 3-foot grade change special permit, and in place added the 4-foot retaining wall special permit in the setback. This isn't achieving the goal either, and just to make a note, a special permit is required for all retaining walls over 4 feet already in the BCOD zoning, regardless of the location on the property. And then for stormwater, this was updated recently, and before many sites that were already developed could be significantly redeveloped without triggering the stormwater requirements. But now pretty much anything that's done on the site requires stormwater review. And we think that this ordinance is probably addressing the concerns that had been raised about stormwater runoff from retaining walls. But we want to hear from you whether this is still an issue or not. And so, looking at these issues, as I mentioned, people are manipulating retaining walls to get more height. So you're getting these really large looking houses that technically meet the regulations, but they're enormous compared to neighboring houses. And it's resulting in houses that don't fit the surrounding context. This also So one of the reasons people are doing this is to get a full basement when you have a high water table, or if you want to try to tuck under a garage. And so it's creating this effect of 3 stories when it's really maybe 2 or 2.5. And also developers are manipulating the basement requirements to get this effect as well. And a lot of the retaining walls that we're seeing are actually outside the setback, so the current ordinance doesn't apply. Which, this is in reference to that. So Hoover Dam, it's creating aesthetically unpleasing effects. So here's another example. Another effect it's having is it's changing the connection and relationship that the house has with the street by walling off the property. And often this leads to removing trees as well. Another view. And so now looking at potential solutions. We think a quick fix that we could do is requiring a special permit for all retaining walls over 4 feet, regardless of the location on the property. We're already doing this with VCOD, so that could be a quick thing that we could get passed. We think that we should address the other issues, and they're just a bit more complex, and so would require more analysis to look into these. And so in terms of next steps, we're going to look into building permits that have already been issued to understand what the issues are and how prevalent it's been, and work with engineering and ISD to further develop possible solutions. So with this, we have some questions for you, and we want to hear your questions as well. Are we missing any other issues? Which of the issues are of the greatest concern? Are we most interested in solving the aesthetic issue? Is it safety from these retaining walls? Is there still an issue with stormwater runoff, or did that new ordinance or the updated ordinance address that? So,
So I think I have Councilor Wright first, then I'll go to Councilor Danberg and then Councilor Albright.
We have in Ward 3, and Councilor Maliki will know about this. This about the runoff in the 400 square feet, and again, developers find loopholes and things like that. And this one property, there was a very big long driveway, and one on the flat side of the property, and then they put the garage and the new driveway on the hill that goes down into the area of the another 2 properties, which gets flooding to begin with. And now they changed, you know, the impervious surface there, and it's supposed to collect on your property, but no one's gonna believe this is gonna happen with what that is. So even with what's there, I don't know if there's some way to look at it. You know, they did do less total 400 square feet, but they really change what's on that lot. And I don't know if maybe changing less than 400 square feet where the impervious surface is now might be something, because they took away all that other area and then they put it in a different area, and it is, I think it's a little bit more than, you know, what was there total, but it's we're all worried and holding our breath, and we've had ISD come in there and it's like, you know, they're following the law. Yeah.
Do you know, was this permitted under the old stormwater or the new one?
The new one.
The new one, okay.
Yes. And yeah.
And just sort of for reference here, we're not, that was when this came up previously, I know one of the big concerns was stormwater. At the time, the ordinance was being updated, so it was kind of like, well, let's wait and see what happens there. That's a bit out of our purview here. I think that's something we want to relay to engineering if it's still not working or not capturing everything, and whether those stormwater regulations and ordinance need to be updated. That is outside of zoning. We're hoping we can get to some of those things with this as well. If we're making it So we're more tightly controlling height and less incentives for manipulating the grading and retaining walls, I think we will get at some of that. But we do still wanna hear how the stormwater is working, and we can share that with our colleagues in engineering. But that would need to happen outside of the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, for that, I think, you know, if it's less than 400 square feet, it's not a problem, but I think it should be where the impervious surface is already. Instead of, you know, let's just take it all out here and put it somewhere else.
Yeah, cause that was one of the things that they were trying to address, cause before, so like, with, you know, some of the more egregious examples are like Northland technically didn't trigger the stormwater requirements, cause it's fully paved and they were gonna have less impervious area afterwards. Now, they worked with us and, you know, did comply with the stormwater requirements at the time, but technically didn't trigger it.
Yeah.
That happened all the time on a much smaller scale, where you have an existing home and a, you know, paving, you tear it down, you rebuild, you're doing significant site work, you're regrading, you're putting retaining walls, but technically you're not increasing the impervious area,
Yep,
so you don't trigger all the stormwater. So that was one thing that they were trying to address here. I would not be surprised if people still found ways around that. So that's, you know, will be good to monitor and, you know, see how that's working, because I'm sure that's gonna need to be tightened up potentially at some point as well, but.
And this stormwater is going into Counselor Greer's property, so you'll hear from her. It's specific.
So, that's one avenue, I just want to be clear, member, and, again, try and think about a response we've got, and you can, I think, take down your slide for a minute, just so I can see what other people are, got hands up. I think Councilor Malik, I'll put you on the list. Okay, Councilor Denver?
Yeah,
And then,
I agree that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. And I'm sure Councilor Albright, who has looked at this for many years, I remember when it came up in '09 or whatever that year was, in zoning and planning, and what we did clearly did not solve it. And I have one quick question for planning, and that is there any kind of site review for retaining walls that are not in the setback?
Yeah, so engineering still has to review them, they still have to be designed by an engineer, they have to be structurally sound. So they're still undergoing review, but there's no limit on the height. So if you can design it and show that it's, you know, an engineer has signed off on it and it is structurally sound, there's no limit to how tall you go.
So that one in Ward 1 was reviewed and they couldn't stop that?
Right. So.
Because it was structurally sound,
Right.
and it was 6 or 4 feet 1 inch or whatever away
Off
from
the
the
setback.
property.
Right, so there's two sort of avenues I think we can go, we may want to do both. Is the special permit for any retaining wall over 4 feet or whatever height you choose, wherever it is on the property. I think that, as you know, Ms. James said, is a pretty easy fix, that's something we could probably move forward now. I think it was even included in this docket item as a, you know, possible amendment. Could also look at a total maximum height on a retaining wall. That one requires some more study, you know, if there are steep lots, not making it so you can't, that it can't be built on, whether, you know, we need to take that into account and what that height should be, if there's a maximum height. So that fell into the sort of needs more analysis, we need to work through that a bit more, but that's also an option, is to cap it.
Are you also talking about, let's say, 3 feet 9, and then another one that's 3 feet 9,
Yes.
and then another one that's 3 feet
And
9?
that's what they, sorry. Yes.
Yes, and that's where I think we wanna look at, so, and that's where we'll need to work with engineering and ISD on exactly how to phrase it. I have seen that before that you can have one retaining wall of a certain height or a combination of walls that don't exceed X
yeah.
height. So there are ways to get a terracing
Yeah.
issue as well. But I think to start, probably the simple thing, and if this is the direction the committee wants to go, is something we can, start to move forward, is just the special permit, regardless of whether you're in the setback.
There's also the issue that needs to, I think we need to look at of what's happening in my neighborhood, where instead of a retaining wall, they made, I'm gonna say ballpark, a 10-foot high basement wall.
Yeah.
So the first floor starts where the second floor is located in all of the other houses on the street.
Yeah, and some of the sites, and sometimes if you're a large enough site, you can accomplish that grading without retaining walls, by really building up the site. And you can manipulate the way we currently define first story as well as, basement, what counts towards, there's when a basement counts towards FAR, or how much of it counts towards FAR that you can play with. And then there's whether or not that basement is technically the first story. And, I think people have gotten pretty skilled at coming right up to the limit on both of those. So the effect is something that meets all the requirements, but feels much, much bigger. And that's where it gets, we have to really look at how we measure height, where you're measuring from. Some of the ideas we threw up there were, do you measure from existing grade? And then you have to really work through what is existing grade, at what point in time can you come in and say, oh, I'm just building a hill on my property, no reason why, and then come back in later for a new home, and that's now your existing grade. So there's things we need to work through with any of these. Do you measure from a constant point, like the sidewalk, or back of curb, or the center line of the street? And so there's things we can do to try and get around that incentive to really regrade your site without having to go back to the 3-foot grading special permit. We spent a lot of time talking with the former commissioner about that when we brought this to the committee a few years ago. And while it seems pretty straightforward, it sounds good, it seems like it's getting at exactly what we want, is having that extra level of review whenever you are manipulating the site. It required just interpretations on interpretations on interpretations in order to excavate for a foundation. The digging a hole in your site is sort of the extreme example there, but it just got out of control in how much the commissioner had to interpret to allow sort of things that it wasn't meant to capture. So I think we want to explore some other ways to get at it, and I think there are other options, but it does require some more work to follow through. Like, will this do what we think we're trying to do? What are potential unintended consequences of that? We don't have a city full of nice, neat, flat, rectangular plots. We have a lot of very unique property sizes and shapes and topography and ledge and all sorts of things people are dealing with. So trying to really think through that will take a bit of time, but.
So let me let other people comment. I just want to mention though that comment to this and the prior item is that this isn't the only city that's wrestling with this problem. So there've got to be some solutions that other people have adopted that we can look at that might be more promising than inventing it completely from scratch. But I do want to go to Councilor Albright, then Councilor Malachy, Farrell, and then Councilor Getz.
Yeah, so this is a good start, and it's a good start. So we will deal with grade changes that don't involve a retaining wall, or we won't?
So I think the first step is the retaining wall, because that's the sort of simplest thing we can do now, fairly easily, I think. I think the next step in which we can start to work on is getting at the grade manipulation and how do we disincentivize that, and is that through how we measure height, how we measure FAR,
you know, that's where we need to do more work and work closely with ISD and engineering on this. And they see this all the time. They're very well aware of the issues, so they're a good resource.
Yeah, we have a problem right now on, it doesn't involve a house, it involves a cemetery that's regrading on your
Yeah.
street. And now, people are getting water in their basements from the regrading.
I've seen some of the
Yeah.
notes on that. Yeah.
So, the only thing I wanted to add, I like the idea of the retaining walls and whether 4 feet is the right height or, I don't know. But, be sure to give some criteria to the land use committee for how to judge
Yes, that's good.
whether the retaining wall should be there or not.
Okay, that's helpful. Councilor Maliki?
Thank you. I don't recall the slide you started with, but I would agree with doing definitely the easy item of, I believe it was requiring a special permit for 4 feet of retaining wall anywhere on the property. Did it also include retaining walls that add up to more than 4 feet?
That we can look into.
Yeah, because if you don't do that, you're just gonna have a lot of, 3'11" plus 3'11" going on. I think at least 3 of you on the committee will remember 78 Lovett Road. It looked like a Roman amphitheater. It was a series of retaining walls that were put in without apparently being approved and got noticed when somebody was responding to a light trespass complaint or something, and that was sort of the granddaddy of retaining wall systems at that point, and it ended up being allowed after the fact because the guy said it was his forever home and he sold it a few years later. I've been thinking about retaining walls a long time. A couple of my concerns are, and also I think you should, as soon as you can, get rid of the manipulation of the grade itself, because why are we allowing people to make extreme grade changes at all instead of just living with what the glaciers left us in terms of contour? There's a couple of areas of concern. It's the tree loss, and Ms. Kyra, you had a very good example of that front yard where to raise the grade of the front yard, they cut down all the trees, and then we got great arborvitae. So tree loss is one concern. The impact on the abutters is another concern. If anyone hasn't been by it, I know Councilor Albright is probably familiar with it. The construction site on the east side of Harvard Circle, where there was dramatic excavation along the property line within the setback to run a driveway down the back, and the neighbors basically uphill had to worry every time we had one of these deluge storms, was the land going to collapse? And ISD was out there making them fix up the temporary wooden, sort of with boards against it type retaining wall during the construction period. I don't know where it stands now, but so it's both what you're living with after the construction is done, is it going to hold up over time, and what's going to happen while the area is being excavated, which will often go into the setback right up to the property line. So I would question why we, right now we say need a special permit if you build a retaining wall over 4 feet in the setback. Why are we allowing retaining walls and setbacks at all? So I think we should think about that as well.
So thank you. I want to go to Councilor Farrell, then Councilor Getz, and then we've been joined by Councilor Leary, who's got her hand up. I'll recognize you in due course. Welcome, Councilor Leary. So it's Councilor Farrell.
Thank you. Let me second Councilor Maliki's last statement. I would like to understand why they are allowing the 4-foot walls to begin with. What was the rationale for that? There are 4 properties in Ward 8 right now where new housing has been elevated. that never had flooding at all and now have flooding because of that elevation. I've been led to believe that one of the reasons the elevation is allowed or is encouraged by developers is because it allows them to add a full basement, which is not counted as a floor. And that's just crazy to me. It is, the houses that I know of this way have 4 people in them, and there's 6,000 square feet, and they're creating flooding. I just don't understand why the wall is even there. In one house is at least 8 feet above the level it used to be at. And I was told it's a matter of the FAR, but I don't know. But why a wall at all?
What is it, Robert Frost said, something doesn't like a wall or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's
Never mind. Councilor Guest.
Okay, I'll remember to jump up my hand right away next time. The ideas that were up there, I really like the idea of the measurement happening at the back of the sidewalk. And I also really appreciate that grade should be measured with it either in that zone or in the setback. The other, as Julia was referencing, just even the change in the topography as well as the change in grade on the site, there's gotta be a way, or maybe there's a limit in terms of how much you can manipulate the site, so that then, and it's done in terms of the metric tons of earth that's coming in or out of the lot. I think that I've seen that in other communities, and I think that that's a really sort of helpful way to just limit the amount of change on that lot.
Thank you. Councilor Leary, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair. Is it my turn now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. As you know, that Great Wall is in Ward 1. When I first saw it, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I couldn't believe that this was allowed by right in the city. So I would fully support the special permit, to require a special permit for all retaining walls over 4 feet, and maybe have a little more discussion about how we came to that 4-foot height of retaining wall. Why should it be less than that? I'm not sure. I also would like to look at the other suggestions that planning has come up with regarding the finished grade, where it really does bother me when I see these new houses built so much higher than their neighbors. And I know that's a deeper discussion that I would like to go into, but I did want to just express my support for some more immediate effort. As a matter of fact, I know Deb Crossley and I did docket a couple of items. And one of them was around retaining walls, but there was another one that was a request for an ordinance requiring topographic data prior to ISD permits. So I wanted to ask about that, if planning can comment on that, or maybe that's more of an engineering discussion, but that's something that I would like to see that could be maybe part of the solution we're looking for here. And then finally, if anyone would like to join me in a docket item to ban arborvitae and plastic fences, plastic white fences, I would be happy to do that. I'm joking, obviously, but I do get bothered by the arborvitae in place of like a 100-year-old oak tree. So thank you very much for having this discussion. And I'd like to take a deeper dive into some of the longer term or more complex discussion that may help us deal with this terrible problem, because I don't believe the stormwater ordinance, though it is much more robust, solves all these problems. And particularly Ward 8, Councilor Farrell, where you have such a high water table there. There shouldn't be any basements allowed in Ward 8. I think there was a reason why they built up the slabs, the houses on slabs there in the 40s when they built those in the first place. But thank you very much for having this discussion.
Thank you. Other members of the committee? So what I'm going to ask is, the department here recommending at least moving forward with a special permit requirement to match what we do in the VCOD. Were there any criteria in that ordinance?
So we did come up with new criteria just for the VCOD special permits in general. We don't think we tailored any criteria to retaining walls, but I do think that's a good point by Councilor Albright that we should give the land use committee some guidance. We'll need to work with our colleagues in ISD and engineering on that to try and figure out what are appropriate criteria.
So one of the questions that occurs to me is that we could take it in two. It sounds to me like we have either 2 bites or 3 bites. The first bite would just be to say, let's have a special permit just like we do for VCOD generally, all right? We could do that relatively quickly. A second would be to say we would take that step, but we would also add, either with it or at a somewhat speedier moment than doing the big study, a criterion or set of criteria that could accompany that standard. And you might think about whether they're appropriate to apply in VCOD as well as here, but leave that aside. But one of them might be, how much is the existing grade being changed at that point and if it's more than, I don't want to go back to the 3-foot grade change by a back door, but at the same time, what we're seeing and you've described with these images is obviously something that we're troubled by. And it may be that by looking at those, you could say presumptively a retaining wall, either stepped or otherwise, so you don't want to just get into the Mayan Temple example or the amphitheater as you talked about, of anything more than 10 feet is just not allowed. I mean, we do have upsets in special permit. And it seems to me that there is some rationale for saying, why should we do that anyway? You know, even if there's a special permit anywhere on the lot, is there a limit to what a reasonable retaining wall ought to be, given the fact this is a built-up city and that one person's retaining wall is the next person's drainage problem? So I guess what I would like to recommend, subject to the will of the committee, is that you come back with a recommendation for us that we can notice for a public hearing and get something started soon, so that we might have it heard and maybe even voted before we get too deep into the term, because I think this is a problem that, you know, the situation that the Great Wall, as someone said, determined in Ward 1, we certainly don't want to see that situation again. And I think we're just inviting it if we don't. So is that feasible for you all to think about?
Yeah,
I mean, at minimum, you just come back with a special permit, and maybe you come back with a special permit plus.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'd like to do that sooner rather than later, and then the longer term issue, I think, is sort of wrapped inside the other discussion we've had earlier, which is we do need to have some reasonable limits on what happens because of the collateral impact. So is that a sense of the committee? All right. So I would, Councilor Kritzman.
I'm happy to move hold.
All right, Councilor Kritzman has moved hold on 7624. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's that. And the final item on the agenda, and we're trying to make our timing work, I think we're still ahead of the game, is 8324. This is discuss and implement key metrics in the reporting process. This item is Councilors Oliver, Wright, Guest, Laredo, Farrell, Kalis, Albright, and Mickley requesting discussion and implementation of a public reporting process for key metrics relevant to the planning department. The discussion should include the topics to address, which metrics to include, where, and how often they should be reported. We would expect that our discussion will lead to a list of topics and metrics that need to be prioritized based on existing data availability as well as staff time. We further acknowledge that this is likely to be an iterative process. By that I mean, I understand it means starting in chunks and doing more later. So, any of the councilors who docketed this item? Do you councilors? Sure, all the councilor.
Great, thank you. So literally, and I think we already heard what I would consider to be exactly the right type of KPIs or key performance indicators in my little world as a consultant again, and I apologize for that, but there you have it, that's what I do during the day. I think really from my perspective, and we just kind of went through a little bit of this kind of with that last little crisis we had with NPS, right? What's going on? What are we doing? What kind of progress are we making? Granted, it was different for what we were seeing with schools, or what parents were asking for. All we have to do is turn that around and apply it to what we're trying to accomplish. So if you can think of a goal that we have within planning, whether that's ADUs, 40B calculations, affordable units being created, like we can all think of 10 of these. And I think really the one way to kind of, think about it is, well, what do we already have data on today? You guys have it, right? We all know, like, okay, there's information in the assessor's database. We're adding certain units, we're getting certain types of builds out of VCOD. How many units are we adding? How many lots are being converted? All of those, I think, are ripe for what I had in mind here, because ideally, what I would like to be able to look at a resident who has a question, and I want to look them in the face and say, yes, that's on the city's website. There's a pretty graph. Go here. Whereas opposed to today, sending them to the city website is mean. I have to go, I feel like I'm compelled, I have to go in, find the link, and then explain it. I just want to send them ultimately, right? Iteration number 10 might be, here's a pretty dashboard. It's got graphs on it. We'll worry about that later. But I do want to, I want us to start to think about what are the top 5, 7, 10, I don't know, pieces of information that we know we have, and you guys are gonna know that better than us, that help us explain how we're doing, what progress we're making on our priorities. At least that's how I looked at it.
Yeah,
And,
and I.
wait a minute, you want to be recognized? Sorry, it's customary. Would you like to be recognized, Councilor? Yes, please go ahead.
So, for example, I think one of them that should be out there is Safe Harbor. That's a question we get all the time. Brookline has it up on their webpage. And we brought that up before, and seeing that, and actually another nice line on there is, okay, these are the number of units that are in Safe Harbor, but that's not the true number of units that are affordable, so having that next to it too, would be helpful too, but that's one of the top 10 I can think of right off the bat.
Should have added that if I.
Let me just interject if I don't have any other hands up. I do think there is an interesting question of what some of our neighboring communities actually report. What I'm hearing is, while this is a legal concept, Councilor Oliver indicates that doing a search for data in our website is cruel and unusual punishment. It qualifies as an 8th Amendment violation. So if we can avoid that risk, I think that's a good idea. But I do think that the question that I'm hearing asked is, there something you are already collecting that is easy enough to translate into a place that it can be found, and come back to us and tell us what those things are, and if somebody has something they want to add to it, then that's. But again, the question is, as I hear the item, how much time is spent actually collecting new data as opposed to taking existing data that exists somewhere and just making it visible. And I think the latter is where, talk about the iterative process, that here the members of the committee and the chair and those documenting would like to start at least, and then add to that if there's nothing to add to it. Is that fair?
Very.
Okay, so if that's possible, is it possible when the next time we take this up, it may not be the next meeting, but a meeting soon, to come in with your recommended list and maybe even ask a place it lives? I don't want to overstate the opportunity here, but
I think just a tab
Councilor
under planning statistics, and then.
Good starting point.
Yeah.
okay, all right. Does that give you enough to work with? I think we're asking you to take what you already know and are compiling and figure out what those things are. Come and tell us where they are, and then where would they live? And is there a relatively simple process for having them translated from your input into an output that the public can look at without going through us?
So
Is that,
some of the things don't live in your departments, but they live in ISD, like the number of ADUs and the number of Airbnbs or what short-term rentals. So you can pluck the data out of their systems.
I would just say, I think if any, you name top one or top two, if you have more, just email them to us over the next week or so.
Sure. And I think I still owe you that list.
your hit parade, okay? All right, so I think members of the committee are so charged. And then you just come back and say what you can do, all right, as a starter. Okay. Councilor Kretzmann.
I move hold.
Councilor Kretzmann has moved hold. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. All right, I will work with the vice chair in the department to try and put together a little bit of a calendar that we can get out to you after we sort out some things. We'll do that next week and then figure out where we are. But thank you all for doing this, and we're done.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. Councilor Kretzmann, you yield that to a member of the committee.
Yeah, I don't monopolize anything, of course.
Councilor Danvers, move to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Carter, Ms. Manuel. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
We just say that